You have landed on The Substance. I'm your host, Trevor Aiken.
And I'm your other host, Philip Marinello.
We're two guys thinking critically about faith, culture, and theology. And we're excited to have you back this week.
Yeah, welcome back to our regular listeners, or thanks for checking us out if this is your first time listening to The Substance.
Absolutely. We know we've had a lot of interaction with some folks who are new to The Substance on social media through some of our guests and things like that. And we're really excited to have folks here to hear about the nuance and different issues in faith, culture, and theology, and join the conversation.
It's been pretty cool on Facebook and Twitter. It seems like it's starting to grow organically a lot more. We've had, depending on when this episode comes out, we've probably had a couple of guests on and have announced future guests. Man, God has been really good and people have been very generous. Yeah. We've been able to talk to some really great people and have some really substantive thinkers and good quality people agree to talk to us in the future. So I'm really excited about all of those shows, and I'm very glad I'm not editing.
Yeah.
Thanks, Trev, for all that you do.
Hey, no problem.
Thanks, Trev, for doing your job.
No problem.
So today, we've teased this before. We've talked about it. I think we mentioned it in the Tree of Life episode with Brett, and I think in one of our early episodes too, it brought up, and then I said, yeah, we'll get to that in its own episode one day. It's Christians and cursing.
So, yeah, we've been thinking about this episode for a while. And Philip, you worked on the roof, right?
Yep.
And I've worked in retail environment where I've
worked a lot of interesting jobs.
Yeah, that's true. And when you get out in the real world, you hear some adult language. You hear some people.
Adult language.
You hear some people who, you know, they're not worried about talking like they're in church or things like that. They're not worried about, you know, necessarily social norms or whatever else. And not only that, I know at my work, I work with some Christians who claim the name of Christ and at the same time are perfectly cool with having swearing as part of their vocabulary. So
that's definitely the case on the roof as well. Both of us, for the bulk of our lives, personally and professionally, have been in the church, and there are definitely people I know don't have the same as that I have on this matter, or it's just a particular area of struggle with them. We're going to get there at the end, but I'm not usually terribly confrontational about this particular topic.
Absolutely.
Because when it's real extreme, it's clear that it crosses the line.
So that's what we want to talk about today. We want to explore with some nuance some of these things, these issue that has really kind of become more and more a thing that people are thinking about and talking about is what is the legitimacy, if there is any, for cursing within Christian's vocabulary. What even is cursing? How does it work? What's going on? What are some of the dynamics here? So to that end, welcome to the discussion on cursing here at The Substance.
Let's get into it.
Yeah, man, absolutely. So, I was
trying to think of a joke and I didn't have one.
Good enough. So whenever I talk to anybody, I even like my secular coworkers who will sometimes like swear and then be like ashamed about it sometimes
in front of you because they know Christian.
I don't. They'll say something along the lines of, "Oh, sorry for taking the Lord's name in vain," or I'll hear like somebody like admonish somebody else not to swear, and they'll say, "Hey, don't take the Lord's name," even if they're not a Christian. Like they'll say like, "Hey,
really?
Yeah."
That's
like,
not something but we are in the Midwest, so I guess that is maybe part of the culture.
Yeah, but I think
I've never heard anybody say that to my knowledge, at least in the adult professional world.
But at least around the idea of swearing, don't you hear that verse brought up a ton?
Oh, Deuteronomy, like using the name of the Lord in vain?
Yeah, that the third commandment, right?
Exodus or Deuteronomy?
I mean, my parents even have this silly thing in their house called the Hillbilly 10 Commandments. And on the third one, no cussing is what is listed. So
and it's funny, there's even so many terms for socially improper language, like cursing, cussing, swearing. Like there's all these funny delineations, and it's like, are these all the same?
Yeah.
Is some of these worse than the other? But it all boils down to appropriate and inappropriate language.
Yeah, and I think we can explore some of that too. But first, I do want to explore like some of these popular ideas out here, and some of these things that honestly, we want to add some nuance or even myth bust a little bit around some of these ideas. And one of the first is that this idea of like, hey, don't take the Lord's name in vain means no swearing, no cursing.
What does that commandment mean?
That's a great question. So let's look at this. This is in Deuteronomy 5:11. I'm going to read from the Net Bible, which says, "You must not make use of the name of Yahweh your God for worthless purposes, for Yahweh won't exonerate anyone who abuses his name that way. So what do you got there in the normal
ESV?
person? Yeah.
You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain, or Yahweh as well, all caps.
Right. So what does it mean to take the name of the Lord your God in vain? And I don't necessarily want to spend a ton of time on it, but probably heard some sermons too about, I know at our church I've heard a sermon where it's talking about like taking the name of the Lord is kind of like bearing the name of the Lord, or kind of being identified with the Lord.
Yeah, identification and oaths are big.
Yes. I'm glad you brought up oaths. I've studied through and preached through Deuteronomy myself, and when I look at Deuteronomy 5 and the following chapters too that also explain it, some people might not be familiar with that structure, but actually the 10 Commandments in Deuteronomy 5 are explained later on. Moses unpacks it, which is really the cool thing about Deuteronomy. But if you look at the...
Again, we mentioned it in the Old Testament morality episode. Yeah. Another PSA for if you don't know where to start in the in the Old Testament, read some Deuteronomy.
Yeah. And interesting thing there, so this commandment talks about the name of the Lord. The next time the name of the Lord is mentioned in Deuteronomy is in Deuteronomy 6:13, which says, you must revere Yahweh your God, serve him, and take oaths using only his name. Okay. And the whole idea in that society was the power of words, the power of what you say. And if you said something and secured it by saying, in the name of Yahweh, I will accomplish this business deal, or I will...
Like the modern day,
it's
the ancient version of like, I swear to God. That means something.
Well,
you're appealing to a something higher than yourself.
Right. And I think even further than that, it's almost like the modern day like notary. I'm appealing to a higher authority that authorizes that what I'm saying is legitimate.
By my notary.
Yeah. And the idea was that by invoking God into that conversation, you were assuming that the power of that God would be for you or against you, whether or not you kept that oath. And so
absolutely.
And so that actually does tie into the idea of identifying with Yahweh, because Yahweh expected his people to only swear by his name. So that would identify them. And so it brought God into all of the business dealings in ancient Israel. And so when they swore that they would do something by his name, and they took his name, he says, don't do it emptily. Don't just do it and then not follow through on what you said. So in a sense, that verse is really more about keep your promise, I think.
Okay. But I wonder where that came from historically. Because just because something comes up in the culture and is commonly agreed, and I'm even talking church culture in this instance, just because enough people have said, oh, taking the Lord's name in vain is using the name of Jesus Christ or God in a exasperated or in an angry or in a... You're not actually addressing like a religious exclamation, some of those religious websites who review movies and television, when they talk about religious exclamations, that's what they're talking about. And somehow at some point in time, that kind of was brought into the banner culturally as taking the name of the Lord in vain.
Well, I know like if you're in an Orthodox Jewish tradition, you won't even write or say God even. It would be G-D, right? Like that's how you're going to see it if you go to Israel or if you're in any place where
Jewish
you're interacting with any Orthodox Jewish community. And that's just because out of reverence for the name of God. And in fact, I mean, even Matthew, in Matthew's gospel, he writes kingdom of heaven instead of kingdom of God. And heaven is being used there as a place word for God.
Substitute.
Yeah. So there's reverence that is owed there. Absolutely. I'm not saying that that's not the case. And I think that does intersect some with swearing, swear words and things like that, especially if you're calling on God to damn something by those kind of divinely invoked swear words, that kind of thing. I think it's more incidental than at the heart of what that command is for.
And that's the important distinction. Not saying that because of this, all those religious exclamations are now fair game. That's not what we're saying.
Right.
Just
we want to
use the Bible appropriately and correctly.
Yeah. Like if we really want to invoke that commandment, we should at least know what that's about. And it's really, it's more about keeping your promise. Like if you break a promise, that is more along the lines, because Jesus even comes in and when he talks about all the oaths, he's like, just do what you say. Let your yes be yes or your no be no. Stop playing games.
100%. If you're a man or a woman that people know claim Christ and you're not dependable, you're taking the name of the Lord in vain.
That's true. Yeah, if you're like a Christian business owner, you got a fish on the back of your truck or whatever, and people are...
Or just people know that you're the Christian.
Yeah.
You invite people to church. You maybe are known for your soft language or things like that, and you're also not dependable. Then you are bearing the name of Christ and God in a inappropriate manner. And
That's
I'm
true.
doing that when I'm undependent. Like,
that's 100% why I don't have a fish bumper sticker on the back of my car. Like, I don't want to like drive in a way that annoys someone in traffic, and then they get annoyed at Jesus because of the way I'm driving.
Sure.
I just don't need that. You know, it's on my conscience.
That's good. Well, let's also move to another biblical argument that people who either like swearing or have already...
Dude, I had a dude at work actually who's not a believer come up and reference this exact argument and say like, I didn't know what I was talking about, because he noticed that he knew that I didn't swear, and he was like one of those guys who like tried to get me to swear or like wanted me to swear.
So tell, like, for the listeners and for my benefit again, you kind of told me about this. Paint that scene for me. I don't know if I've ever quite experienced that, and I've worked around some very colorful fellas. I think actually maybe I have, but kind of tell me about your relationship with this guy, like in a minute or two here.
I mean, he was in a more tenured position at work than me, and it just, I don't know.
It just amused him. The idea of getting you to swear amused him.
I don't know what to say other than I just didn't swear, and we interacted a lot, and so he knew that I didn't, and he did, and he just thought it was silly. He had some sort of incidental relationship with the church, but like wasn't a believer, wouldn't claim Christ. But it was just really interesting.
But he knew enough to reference this, and
this
for listeners' benefit, what we're talking about is...
Yes, in Philippians 3, some people would say that Paul made us swear.
That's a great phrase.
And so here's what in Philippians 3 it says. Paul says, "More than that, I now regard all things as liabilities compared to the far greater value of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things. Indeed, I regard them as dung, that I may gain Christ." And he goes on from there. That's the net version.
Or ESV says rubbish.
Yep, exactly. So this, what's interesting is this word,
which it is a strong word.
I think that's undeniable. That is at least very, very strong, like strong language.
It is a strong word,
attention-getting language.
Yeah, no, sure. It's a strong word describing and calling to mind something unpleasant.
Right. So this word rendered dung, I don't get too much in the Greek, but and I'm probably saying this wrong for anybody who actually knows Greek or is Greek Orthodox. They're going to pick apart my pronunciation, but skubulon is the
We've
Greek
both
word.
taken many years of Greek. I think he can do a Greek pronunciation.
Dude, some people out there, though, like, they'll tell you that they know the right way to say it, and we don't, and I'm okay with that. If you're one of those people, God bless you and your family. But
right.
So some interesting notes here. So this is actually from the net. This is their note. They say the word here translated dung was often used in Greek as a vulgar term for fecal matter. As such, it would most likely have had a certain shock value for the readers.
So a vulgar term with shock value.
And they say this may well be Paul's meaning here, especially since the context is about what the flesh produces. So interesting ideas there. And so that's why some people would say, hey, this is basically the S word. And so you can say it because Paul said it.
That would be a compelling argument. If the Bible is inspired and is good, and if a biblical author in the Bible, because I mean, the authors, the human authors, we're all human and fallen. And it's not that because something happened in the personal life of somebody who authored a book of the Bible that is appropriate. But the words in the Bible are sacred. And if an author of the Bible uses something that is actually foul language, then wouldn't that open the door for foul language being fine?
Well,
in some circumstances,
yeah, I think you would only be able to take, even if that was what it was going on there, like if Paul was using the S word there, I think you could take it so far, but I don't think you could have just full license for whatever out of that.
Certainly not, and I don't even think it is.
General principles of what Paul talks about in Ephesians, which we'll get to later, but I think what's really interesting too is that one, I wouldn't think it's the S word either.
I think that's an important thing. Like either it is or it isn't. And best studies don't really, with the materials available
Mm-hmm.
and textual scholarship, that doesn't really appear. Oh, one for one, that term dung is exactly our cultural use of the S word.
Yeah.
I always kind of thought of it more like crap, which is also
Right.
not the best word, not polite.
Yeah.
My wife doesn't always like it when I say it. I think I actually heard myself say it on this show once or twice, and whenever I hear it, I go, ooh, don't know if I want to
Yeah.
have that out there.
Yeah. And what's interesting is the standard Greek New Testament dictionary would agree with you on that, with saying that it's crap. But what's also interesting is that's one way to think about it, right? And you could say, hey, maybe he's just saying it's crap and he's using strong language. And obviously there's a case in that, where there is some strong language, but is there a qualitative difference between saying crap and the S word? And we'll make an argument later for that, but I believe that there is. But not only that, there's some people who would say that that's actually not even what's going on here. So the New International Dictionary of New Testament Theology and Exegesis on this word talks about, should I just read this quote?
If you like.
I'll read it. It says, some have thought Paul here deliberately uses language that's vulgar or at least crude, perhaps comparable to the English word crap.
Oh, nice.
However, the use of the term by various writers like Philo
Contemporaries.
in the Greek literature, doesn't indicate such a nuance. The rendering of the New International Version in 2011 is probably on target, which says, I consider them garbage.
So even that applies today. So
Mm-hmm.
we're going to be using these words. You can say like, oh, all that stuff in the closet, that's just a pile of crap. You're not talking about feces.
Right. Yeah.
So it's a very diverse word.
Sure. What's interesting too is that there was a false etymology that was ancient. Like, so believe it or not, ancient people thought about words and where they came from and studied them too. And we actually have some of those ancient writings. And there's one on this word where they thought that the etymology of this word was what was thrown to the dogs. That's actually a fault. Like that's
trash and scraps.
Yeah, like that. Well, that the actual etymology of the word came from the Greek word for dog.
Oh, they thought
and
that,
to throw.
and it was not correct.
The ancient people thought that about that word. If Paul was aware of that incorrect understanding of etymology, he may have been actually referencing that because that might have been a common popular understanding.
I might regard it as something that I would throw out to the dogs.
Right, which would connect with his previous wordplay when he talks about the Judaizers saying, beware of the dogs.
Interesting.
So it could be even a reference there where he's not even going to the harsh, oh, that's
crude.
crap.
Sure.
Because some of this comes down to like the dating of this part like of Philippians, like, or the entire letter based on the usage of this word and like where this word was in history, because
that'd be an interesting PhD study.
Yeah. I mean, I bet you there's some fruitful stuff there.
Hey, what did your pastor do his PhD in? Crap.
Or not, depending on what the dating is and where, because words change in meaning, right? Like they morph.
And that is, I think, going to probably come up a number of times in this episode where it's not that words have no meaning and we can use them whatever way we want, but words are contextual and cultural. I mean, really contextual. We'll say contextual because there's all sorts of different contexts.
Yeah,
words are
cultural.
contextual.
Yeah, and contextual and yeah, absolutely cultural as well. So all that to wrap up, like you can't make a compelling argument out of the reference from Philippians 3 for cursing when the best you can go, the furthest you can go, the most harsh you could go would be with something along the lines of crap.
But there is good arguments that he might not even be doing
gone that far. Exactly.
Interesting. So I think with this next bit that you have on our outline here, you're referencing that podcast you sent me?
Sure. There's a Stuff You Should Know podcast about how swearing works, which is really interesting.
Can maybe link to that in the show?
Yeah, absolutely. They're a really popular podcast.
Show notes.
And they gather up some research online from some Slate articles and BBC articles and stuff like that, and kind of talk about that for a little bit. So it's really accessible. But I think this is just a popular idea too, that people think that people who swear, they're not smart. They don't have any vocab. People just swear because they don't know what to say. This
is more of a side point because the main focus of this with our thinking critically about faith, culture, and theology is what's the place of this in the life of a believer and not
Mm-hmm.
what's the place of this in the life of an intelligent person.
Well, and I think in the life of a believer, we want to make sure that we have perspectives that are formed based on truth.
100%. Okay.
And my thought is that I think sometimes we like to ensconce
the
our
church.
ideas, of morality in these other ideas. And so we like to be, because if we can say that everybody who curses
It's just a dum-dum.
is a dum-dum and doesn't have good vocab, then we can lift ourselves up as at least vocabularily.
Vocabularily? Is that what you-
I almost went there. Shout out to Doc Z.
Hey, he'd probably love that. I bet
He probably
I bet
would.
he has published that word.
Yeah.
I would not be surprised.
But as regards vocabulary, we would say that we're superior, or we have like superior intellect by saying that, right? And we like to maybe think that, but best research doesn't support that. And I think this is somewhat intuitive, that just because somebody, especially nowadays, like just because someone says a swear word doesn't mean that they have a paltry vocabulary, that they have somehow a poverty of words to choose from. They're intelligent, and whether or not you curse doesn't say that you're intelligent or not.
Sure.
And so just let's not go there.
And I have seen a number of studies, and they reference it in the How Stuff Works podcast. One of the ladies in one of my networking groups shared a post recently in one of our Facebook pages where it's like people who swear more typically do score higher on various IQ tests and things of that nature.
Interesting.
But that was kind of interesting.
Yeah. So I just think let's stop thinking that. Let's not, like, that's not true,
It's not
first
being
of all.
outwardly judgmental.
And not, yeah, exactly. That just like supports a judgmental attitude towards people, and that's not helpful. That's not what it's about. If you're not swearing just because you think it makes you smarter than somebody, then you're failing in other areas. If it's not about what we're going to talk about later, it's not about just being polite or whatever else. You could have your own personal reasons, but if it's for some sort of like sense of superiority over your peers, then that's a pretty poor reason.
No, I thought that was good that you added that to the rundown. I would not have thought to add that to the discussion.
So what about this last one here, Phil?
They're just words.
How many times have you heard someone make that argument to you? I hear that all the time. Christian, non-Christian alike.
I was going to say, I've heard that. That's one that I hear pretty commonly from both sides, or I have heard pretty commonly from both sides.
Honestly think that brings up a really important part of this whole discussion.
Well, first, before you get to there, why do you think people even say that? Why do you think people even feel the need that that's going to be the way they justify themselves?
I think it really does come down to the power of words.
Sure.
When you lift up this idea, and when you look back at the Old Testament and like the way that they're talking about not taking the Lord's name in vain, and when they're talking about things that we're going to look at, what Paul says, like, words are powerful. Words have meaning. They carry weight. And I think what people are trying to argue in that is that, they're just words. They don't carry meaning. They don't carry a lot of weight.
Yep.
And they've got a little bit of it twisted. And so I want to talk a little bit about the philosophy of the word, and maybe you can go into some of the psychology of like how the brain responds to some of these.
Mm-hmm.
So we can kind of from two angles point out that there's no such thing as they're just words. What is a word?
I mean, I would say that a word is a vehicle of communication.
Yeah, I kind of think of it, if I want to give an analogy, I'm going to give some tech analogies, I guess, because we're probably talking to some tech savvy people if you're listening to a podcast, or a newly tech savvy person if you're a newcomer to a podcast.
Hey, welcome to the show.
Shout out. So here's the thing. A word, you know what a hyperlink is, like a link to a website.
Sure.
A word is kind of like that. A word.
Oh, in our brains?
Yeah,
like
well,
our brain
a
responses?
word exists to link your brain
To meaning.
to an idea or something that exists in reality.
Yep.
Right? It refers to that. It takes you there in your mind. That's what a word is for. But at the same time, a word also carries with it more than just a link to that idea. And that's why, like, it's not the same to say excrement as it is to say crap, even though both of those refer to fecal matter, right? And I just used three different words to refer to the same thing.
That's a very funny sentence. Did you ever think that was a sentence you were going to say when we were brainstorming the substance discussions on faith, culture, and theology?
I mean, I wouldn't have ruled it out. But yeah,
Sure.
in that sense, like a word really does carry a lot
Nuance.
of nuance. It carries meaning. It carries perspective. It carries
And it carries the desired elicited response as well in some instances.
Absolutely.
I think part of the other thing that you were teasing is what they talked about on the show is the way that, and I don't have the studies up in front of me. I'm sure I could look them up, but basically the gist of it was that when humans say whatever expletive and exclamation it was in a situation, the areas of the brain that are stimulated when saying or hearing these words are much more emotional and almost even primal, if you will. You mess something up bad or you hurt yourself.
Right.
So like on the roof, if somebody dropped a really heavy piece that we were working on, maybe even on them or on the roof itself, and it damaged it, and they say something profane, they're not trying to communicate, like whatever it is, they're not trying to elicit whatever the literal meaning of that word is. It's more of a emotional release valve.
Yeah, what's really interesting about that and what they said, just to bring out some more clarity on that, was the word, like when your brain is listening to language, even this podcast right now, well, the way it works is it kind of hears the parts of the word and it's parsing it out, and it is like referencing that to your known dictionary of words in your brain of things that you understand.
100%.
And using all the contextual clues and basically, so you have like a language processing center that is generating and telling you meaning. And out of that, sometimes it can generate emotion, stuff like that. But
100%.
when someone swears, so like if I say the word excrement, your brain takes all of those syllables, puts them together, and understands exactly what I'm talking about.
Yep.
But if somebody uses the swear word, even for that same thing, it actually bypasses all of that language processing center that goes on in your brain and hits directly into the emotional center. So obviously that's cultural.
Which is wild.
Yeah. And obviously it's cultural too, because if I was to bring up some Malaysian swears, nobody, unless you were Malaysian, like you wouldn't know those.
And it's really interesting because I have been to a number of different places, but I particularly remember in Africa. I've been to Africa a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
And over there, a lot of people speak English. And what we consider, they use the S word the way we use crap. And that's just the way it is culturally.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the missionaries and pastors we're working with. The first time I heard them say this, I kind of chuckled. I saw some of the people on our team, just like you right now, eyes got real big, eyebrows went up to the top of the head going, what did he just say?
What alien world did I land in?
And I think the first time I was there, or one of the times I was there with someone else who it was their first time, I think they actually asked them, what? And then they repeated it again, and like you could see,
no problem.
You could see their brain. They're like, "What did you say?" Like, "Hey, maybe I misheard them." Right. And then they said it again, and like you could see, like they just kind of fried their brain for a second.
Yeah. So that's an important part of it, because obviously, based on that cultural context, words are gonna do that to certain people's brains, right? That it won't for other people. If I'm in France and I use the French word for that, then it's going to interact with them in a way it would not interact with me or Philip. And so in that sense, words are cultural, but they're also, so when we think of words, and this is kind of getting back to what I was saying more on the philosophical side, because I finally remembered my second analogy here, is that words are kind of like image files on your computer. So you know how like when you have an image file on your computer, you have the picture itself, but you also have all the data about like when it was taken.
Interesting.
The location of it, even nowadays, those kind of things.
It's so weird.
Yeah.
When you see a picture on your phone now and you see all of that. It's just pretty wild.
So not only, so in that sense, like when you use a word, it not just has the link to the referent of the thing in reality, the idea, the concept of the object in reality that it refers to.
Sure.
But it also carries metadata of all the ways that it causes people in your culture to feel, and the background of all of those different things of the way you interpret and apply it. So they're not just words.
Absolutely. So,
and that's why swearing kind of breaks down into these different categories that it breaks down into, right?
Absolutely. So let's move to, we talked about some things that, or maybe misconceptions perhaps. Right. So what's real? What is the substance of what the Bible actually has to say? Mm-hmm. And therefore, if we want to live lives that honor God, live in light of God's revealed word, how ought we to think and listen and speak? Right,
absolutely. I think that's the important thing, is to come back to like, all right, what does the Bible teach on this? that's all we're saying. We're saying this is what the scripture says, right? Like that's as far as we can go with it, as far as any authority. We're not going to be able to pass judgment on any of our listeners or something because of whatever. But we can just say, hey, here's what we see in the Word of God, right? So what's interesting, and I think this goes back to like the thing that we just kind of unpacked about words, is there's really kind of only two types of swearing out there. Every swear word can be categorized as either a divine invoking swear word, like some sort of invocation of a deity or a deity's power. So references to hell or references to God's power to condemn people there or things like that, like all of the swear words that come out of that, direct invocations of God's name, Jesus's name, things like that. And then there's also visceral swearing. So,
and that's what you see more typically. Yeah, I've heard and seen.
And those are the swear words that refer to the things that we treat with modesty about our bodies, whether that's waste or sexual or things like that. The things that we associate and cover and
yeah, I always think of it like publicly. Scatological and anatomical.
Yeah, scatological, anatomical, sexual, like things like that. Things that are not necessarily the stuff that you want brought up.
Impolite conversation.
Correct. And so those are kind of the two versions of swearing. And so that's really where you can go back to Deuteronomy 5 and say, yeah, you're invoking God's name and bringing God into a lot of things just flippantly, at least on the divine invocation kind of swearing side. That does kind of apply in that sense, right?
Absolutely.
But I think even stronger than that, if I can just get to the heart of it here, is a verse in Ephesians chapter 5. And to me, this is the slam dunk, something my Greek professor always used to say. Shout out to John Anderson. But the Greek here is unambiguous. There is no wiggle room on this.
In the English language, too, obviously the Bible is written in Greek, but you can't read this and go, oh, that doesn't mean anything.
Yep. So Ephesians 5 verse 4, reading out of the net again, Paul says, neither should there be vulgar speech, foolish talk, or coarse jesting, all of which are out of character, but rather thanksgiving.
Yep.
So obviously we're jumping into a context there. Sorry about that.
And it's pretty similar in other versions as well.
But ultimately this word here, the net translators translated it as vulgar speech. And
literally, it just means foul language.
Yep. In the Greek literature, the ancient Greek literature, it literally went to foul language, literally was referred to obscenity. So,
and that's a direct command. Paul says, let there be no filthiness and obscenity.
Right. So, in other words, if Paul wanted to use the best Greek word he could use to tell people not to curse and swear, not to use either of the two types of foul language we just mentioned, this is exactly the word he would use to do that.
And he did.
So to me...
So if you're a believer and are seeking to live in a manner that honors God, the Bible says that's out of bounds.
Right. And this is the way I think about it too. And we can jump on to the principle of gracious speech in a second. But on this verse, the way I think about it is, hey, Jesus called me to take up my cross, to follow him. He called me to die to myself and to live for him. And he's called me to do that in a lot of ways that are really, really, really challenging.
Absolutely, yeah.
Here, he just asked me not to use certain words. This is just part of it. It's not the whole thing. That's an easy part of it to me, right? And I'm not wanting to downplay anybody's struggle, but...
Not almost. It doesn't matter if it's easy or not.
Right.
Because it also talks about don't be a drunkard. That's easier for me and you than it is for other people.
Sure. And
so just the ease, you don't want to...
I don't want to necessarily hang on too much, but hey, like, here's a thing in your Christian life to follow God. And here's also, I'll tell you where I'm going with that, because I think the drunkard thing goes too, but it's like, all he's asked me to do is not say these words.
I think, though, where this, and neither of us have had this experience, I think where this comes in is the person who comes from a culture or a context or just personal lifestyle where profanity is a regular part of it, and then they come to Christ.
Sure. And then,
so neither of us had this experience. I know people who grow up in contexts personally, all the movies they watch, all the music they listen to, all that they intake is just filled with profanity.
Right.
And then they come to Christ, and then that is a part of their life that they then need to mortify.
Right.
And do they need to mortify? Like that's the person who this applies to more.
Yeah, and I think so. Like,
Where we
so
need to be
much
gracious.
we want to be gracious to that person who's dealing with that, and not judge people. And people struggle, and it's language. And the thing is, in a sense, where the people who are saying it's just words, like it is the glory of a king to overlook an offense, right? So if somebody's using offensive language, it's offensive to you, especially if they're working on it. They know, like you have that knowing look sometimes. You're like, just let that be it sometimes. But I guess more I'm speaking to that person who grew up in a Christian home and knows that this is wrong and is now in a cultural environment where like everybody around you is doing it. And you
Christian
feel that
community.
peer pressure, because that's the thing. Like, we live in a world where cursing is more common than ever before.
Is that true?
I think it's objectively true. Like, if you study,
We don't need to get into that too deep.
you don't need to do it. But
I'm always a little bit wary when somebody says
I am too.
whatever bad thing
is
on
new,
the docket
sure,
is particularly bad now.
But I think if you look at any statistical study, whether it's like people
Actually,
self-reporting on I curse at work, or people like or cursing in media, like
I did
not to get
read
into curse counting, but
no, not that. I read or heard, maybe it was even an NPR podcast talking about professional literature of the last either 5 or 10 years or something like that, where it was recent, and the amount of profanity used in that is up quite a bit from previous years or generations.
I think it's objective. And I think part of it is because language moves, like we've talked about. So that adds an interesting dynamic in all of it as well. But
the
my
Christian
point
who
is, for the Christian
knows
more than ever before,
Interesting.
this is becoming an issue where you are going to stand out by not doing this. And my call to you is that this is your Lord telling you in Ephesians, saying, don't do this. And it's an easy thing. You just don't say the thing you've never said in your life. Don't say the things that you've grown up not doing. That's, in a sense, an easy one. Out of all the things that you have to, and not to trivialize it, because it is hard to stick out. It is hard to be different. But man, I mean, if that's the worst you're going to suffer, is people are going to make fun of you because you don't cuss for Christ, like that's not that big of a deal.
So before we get on to kind of final thoughts here, I did want to bring up, we got a question on Twitter from a listener saying, would love to hear discussion on this argument that I've actually heard before, paraphrased. Quote, swearing makes the believer's communication, even potentially gospel persuasiveness, more accessible to unbelievers, and is therefore an effective means of promoting the truth. So just like what you said, we're living in a culture now where it's become more prevalent.
Right.
And in order to, I don't know, ingratiate yourself into the culture or to have more in common with the culture, in order to reach the culture, you need to be cultural. And if the cultural norm is swearing, some people would argue that swearing makes the believer's communication of truth more accessible.
Yeah.
So if your gospel had more F-bombs in it, people would listen to you.
And there were some pastors famously who'd done that, in the last decade. So stuff like that has been being brought up, and it doesn't go away, right? People are still wrestling through these things. But here's the thing. I feel the heart of that. I want to say that.
I'd say let's get at that, because again, if we look at Ephesians, and you don't even have to do a big bad dive into the original language where it says clearly no foul language,
right?
That's kind of like open and shut. So when somebody brings up a question like that, and just be like, it's open and shut, the answer is no. Like, why somebody would answer that,
I mean,
and maybe kind of deal with that.
Well, because I think these people are not, like, if you think that, I don't think you're convinced that it's sinful. I don't think you think that it's immoral, or that God has asked you to not do that. I think you think it's a gray area, and you're trying to include whatever gray areas that where unbelievers are, so that you're not putting obstacles in the gospel. And I feel that side of it, where it's like, if there's stuff that is not essentially like, this is right and wrong, this is true and false kind of stuff, but it's in the gray, and we as Christians continually make that the hallmark of a believer for us in our society, then we're essentially adding things to God's requirement on our lives, and we shouldn't do that.
Absolutely don't want to do. Yeah. And famously, so many things are wrong with that.
Absolutely.
When you are adding things and determining what a Christian is by outward appearance.
Right. But at some point, hey, this is just the revelation of God, and so this isn't in that category.
So you're saying it's not a gray area?
Yeah. I don't think there's any gray here. That I think that Scripture is really clear that if there is something that in your culture is defined as foul language, and I don't care how many people say the F word and the S word and that kind of stuff, like, you know that it is.
Go through all the letters, Trev.
Yeah. The A through Z words,
Yeah.
whatever. Like,
Sure, absolutely.
you know what it is.
Yeah.
And so,
Because you know it when you hear it.
yeah,
Your brain, just like we said,
exactly.
your brain goes, oh, that's a cuss.
Yeah, it responds. It literally skips your language processing center and responds emotionally. Like, so you know what those are. And the thing is too, to bring in the cultural side of it.
Mhm.
And I think this kind of gets into kind of some of our now what, like so what's.
Yeah, the entertainment one I feel like is real big, and I don't even know where.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Can I jump into the Minnesota one first?
Yeah, do that one first.
So and I think this is where it kind of gets into. So
and define your terms here too for our listeners.
yeah, so minced, that's like the
minced oaths is what he's saying.
Yeah.
Listeners.
So that's kind of like Christian swears. So crap,
Freaking.
dang it, stuff like that.
Substitute swears.
Yeah, frickin'.
Because the first time when I was looking at the rundown here and I saw you added minced oaths, I was like, what's he talking about?
Yeah. And that term came from the show. That's the technical term.
Sure.
For
No,
those kind of things.
I got it. But when I first saw it, I was like,
Yeah.
is this more of like the swearing, like taking the name of the Lord to like
Right.
plead your case, whatever?
So there's two sides of this, right?
Okay, hit it.
One is the fact that there is something, like we said before, there's something natural about, like, stub your toe, you say ouch, like you say dang, you say whatever. Like, some of this, it's emotional venting, right?
Yep.
Now, the thing is, along with that, like we said before, what's the metadata of that word? Like, what freight is being carried in that word? And as we also already said, that is culturally defined. So, like you were bringing up, the S word in that African church was culturally defined as inbound.
Yeah.
Here, not so much. Why we're not saying.
Yeah, if a pastor here stubbed his toe
Right.
and said that,
Exactly.
that'd be a very different thing.
But you were talking about like saying crap and feeling bad about saying crap, or like somebody, and I think there's a sensitivity you feel like, that in some people's,
On some people's radar.
in some people's culture, that's not there. That's not there. And for me, that's not there as far as the obscenity. That does not trigger my brain as, oh, that's obscene.
Sure.
But for some people, it does.
Which is the sensitivity every
Yeah.
now and then. Like if I say it thoughtlessly, especially on a show that we are really desiring to deal with substantive things and think hard about the things of the Lord, I don't want to be crass or thoughtless.
Right. And we had a good friend of a church leader of ours who she was convinced that the worst possible thing that you could say was sucks, which is like, like that sucks or something like that. Like, to her, that was worse than the F word. And to me and you, that's not cursing. That's, but hey, like, the point is, Romans 14 comes in, like, in her mind, when you said that, it went there for her. So
And I think that one's kind of a weird one
it's weird
because like that kind of is like a hybrid
it is.
because
But care about others. Be sensitive. If she's around,
I don't need to dig deep into that one. I
if
guess.
she's around, don't say it. And so know that. Like, if your grandma and grandpa, like, you say crap and they're like, Sonny, don't say that. Don't say it. How hard is that? Like, be kind to people. And I think that goes to the general principles that Paul gives in Ephesians 4, where he talks about, let your speech be gracious, right? Like everything
build
should
up
be
one another.
for edifying. Exactly. And sometimes maybe you don't know. And that's like where some of that cultural boundary is kind of clashing and coming together, and there's mixing. We need to find out from each other where we're at and then adapt ourselves to care for one another.
Yeah.
In that sense, we don't have to dumb down our language to the most profane level so that everybody's on the same level there. We can accommodate each other, right? People don't need to accommodate our language and be okay with us being profane. Like, we should accommodate ourselves to one another. Like, we should be the ones who are willing to bend on that so that we don't offend each other.
Which is kind of an interesting segue to the final two. People brought these up on social media as well. One being, how should a believer respond to the swearing of others in real time, whether it's believer and unbeliever? Probably two different answers to that. And then also, how should a believer think about, respond, come up with their own standards in regards to profanity in various forms of media?
Yeah, that's the toughest one, right?
So let's hit the response one. Well, actually, I mean,
I think that one's a little bit easier.
It is. Yeah. So response to others, whether it's, let's hit unbelievers first.
I would say like main thing is don't let your main testimony to other people be that you're the swear police.
Because
God
what you
has
do,
not called you to that.
and what you do communicate unintentionally, I hope, is that the mark of a believer. And also, they're not believers.
Right.
Little side note here.
Ephesians was written to the community of faith. Now that it is reflecting morality.
Sure, that is God's law. But if you're going around slapping people because they're not abiding by God's law when they hate God and God's law is not written in them, like at this point.
And if like every time they come into work and be like, oh man, I drank a little bit too much last night or whatever else, and you're like, oh, well, you shouldn't drink or you shouldn't get drunk. Like, is that really your response? Like, is every time somebody talks about who's an unbeliever talks about like just their general life, you're morally correcting them? What does that say about you? Is that what Jesus did? I think pretty clearly he called people to repentance in real relationships in the midst of caring for them. And I think that's important that it's, and here's my thought on it, honestly, Philip, is that I'm not their judge. They will not answer to me for the careless words that they say. And I won't answer to me or to them ultimately either for the careless words I say, because the thing is, I say careless words that I ought not say, even at work.
So, which goes into the other side of that coin, how ought a believer to respond to another believer using profanity?
I think in the initial moment, probably no different.
I agree.
But at a certain point...
Because there's nuance there too. Is it an extreme circumstance? Is it common or uncommon?
Gain understanding, I think, first off, is like, hey, I've noticed in your language... You're willing to do this, like, help me understand. Like, I honestly just want to know where you're coming from first.
That's something our pastor talked with my wife and I a lot in premarital counseling. The help me understand is so great. Yeah. I use it at home with my wife. I use it out and about. I use it a lot. Free. Yeah, help me understand. I mean, one of the best questions you could ask when there's any sort of tension.
Yeah.
Because a lot of tension, conflict, negative interpersonal interaction and communication really does stem from misunderstanding.
Yeah, and mean that too. Like, just you got to know where they're coming from first before you can interact with them. Otherwise, you just start shouting out with all your different points and sub points and all this kind of stuff, and they might just be like, "Yeah, man, I'm struggling with this."
And even if you're right and they're wrong, the end goal shouldn't be to lift up yourself for being right.
Right. And even First Thessalonians talks about the fact that there are different responses of correction to different people in different situations, right? That we need to tailor the way we minister to a specific individual in a specific situation. So if you don't come in trying to gain that understanding, you're not going to do it correctly.
You want to hit the reference on that one? That's a very good insight to apply to that particular question.
Definitely. That's from 1 Thessalonians 5. And what's really interesting too is he's talking directly to all of the believers in the church, actually even distinguished from leadership. And he says...
so this is for all believers.
Yeah, absolutely. He says, we urge you, brothers and sisters, admonish the undisciplined, comfort the discouraged, help the weak, be patient toward all.
So you have three different types of disposition of people.
Right.
Not everybody struggling with any particular sin or holiness issue is coming from it from the exact same point of view.
Absolutely. And patience, right? That taking that moment to gain understanding is an exercise of patience, is an exercise of being quick to listen, slow to speak. So don't get angry with believers, people who are claiming the name of Christ who are dealing with this. Like, see where they're coming from and talk with them. Start a conversation. And then maybe you might ask them, like, hey, what do you understand about this verse, for example? Like maybe Ephesians 5.
Not everybody is that. Exactly. Not everybody's in the same walk in their life.
Yep.
You could be coming from a completely different background and experience as somebody else, and it's never good to go in assuming.
Absolutely. So, yeah, shout out for our listener who's sent in that question.
Absolutely.
Maybe related to one of the hosts.
And then the most challenging question probably is, how ought we to react with profanity in media?
Yeah.
So music, movies, television, podcasts.
I mean, right now, like if you're listening to this, think for a moment. Have you ever laughed at any joke or friend or anything that involved swearing? If the answer is yes, that's what we're talking about. Yeah, what do you do?
Or like a movie with profanity, or like an album with profanity.
Right. You know,
have you ever had a positive response to something with this in it?
Do you have that album where it's like, man, I like the explicit version better than the clean version because it gets closer to the author's, original flavor? Like,
yeah, yes is my answer.
So,
which now, as a side, did I talk about this on the show, or did I just tell you this personally?
What?
So I really am a big hip hop fan, as you know, Trev.
Mm-hmm.
I think for the first time in my life, I now appreciate clean versions now that I have a very, very beautiful 4-month-old boy.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm listening to him, we're rocking. It's a real good beat. And if I can put on the clean version, I just don't have to work like.
So you're worried about the influence on his mind.
Yeah.
And so at the same time, then we could ask the question about what about the influence on your mind?
Well, and that's an interesting question, because at a certain point, my wife and I have had this discussion a lot. At what point will we expose him to various things?
Right.
And me personally, I feel a lot more probably openness.
This is the world you live in.
Than she does.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, like you said, this is the world we live in.
And what's wrong with you is inside you, not outside you.
Yes. And not everything is equal. It's not anything with profanity is cool. But there are some things that I think have a lot of value that also have profanity.
Sure.
It's not that profanity equals value, but profanity doesn't necessarily equal throw it out. And we talked about this before on a few other episodes. There's a difference. I think we talked about it in our media and worldliness episode. Mm-hmm. There's a difference in consuming for mindless pleasure and consuming to consider.
Sure.
And to be a part of various cultural conversations, or to just interact with an idea, much like there's a lot of bad theology out there. There's a lot of bad politics and social science out there. And if I read a book by a guy who I wildly disagree with socially or politically or theologically, I can read it, hear what he has to say, and then form my opinion on it. It's not, if I listen to something with profanity, I am now a profane man in opposition to Paul's command in Ephesians.
Yeah. I guess the tough thing for me is, what's that dichotomy of testimony that I give? Like,
that's huge.
If
that's a big part of it.
If my kid says something, right, and I laugh at it, no matter what it is, they will say it more, right? Like, I am encouraging it.
It's so hard.
And I'm telling them.
I'm not looking forward to that.
I'm communicating positive value to them, right?
Sure, you are, yeah.
In the same vein, if my coworker in jest or whatever starts shouting off whatever word, and I think it's hilarious because maybe it is in that moment, by bursting out laughing at the same time saying,
you're giving your
blessing. What I'm saying? Like,
yes.
I'm like appreciating and approving of all of their swearing while saying, I'm not willing to do that. So in other words, like, if all the world, right, if all the world followed Jesus, which is what we want, none of that would exist. And
sure.
if I'm entertaining that, I'm almost saying that, like, I don't value a world where none of that exists. I value the world, the corruption of where this exists in a sense. And
I think that's maybe taking it a little bit far.
I think that's like philosophical. You always say too far when I think I get to the philosophical part of it.
Well, no, we both read and appreciate Pushing the Antithesis, and I think it's a very helpful exercise.
Sure.
Where you take an idea to its logical end in order to test it and to check its implications out. But are you really? In the moment, your coworker makes a joke and the punchline has a swear word in it and you laugh. Are you actually communicating to them, adult to adult? I think that was good that you used that word.
Whether or not that's the case, my point is that if I'm enjoying it,
then what?
If I'm enjoying swearing, if I'm a kind of person that enjoys swearing so much, is my enjoyment lessened by the increase of holiness?
I think that is a good question to ask. Sure.
Because that's what we're talking about. Like, it is a world where that is silenced a less funny world? Is it a less enjoyable world? Is it a less comedic world? Or is there... So then what's the place, I guess, you know what I mean?
Well, because that author intent. So, like, somebody writes an album. There are clean versions of albums, but I mean, somebody writes a TV show, writes a movie, writes a book. Those words are there.
Right.
They can't not be there. Are we gonna advocate that? No, you can't. I just think there's a gray area. It's a conscience issue, and we also wanna.
I think
we don't want to throw out discernment by saying it's a conscience issue.
No.
Therefore, everything's on the same field. That's not what I'm saying at all.
No.
But the bare minimum of, if your conscience is actually pricked and convicted, and you continue and proceed, that's wrong.
Right. Well, and I think the things you like to listen to usually turn into the things you like to say. So
Sure.
you just got to be careful.
Well, and introspection, self evaluation.
Right.
Because I don't listen to a ton of secular rap much anymore, but I listen to loads of podcasts. And that's actually where I found out I have to do more discerning and saying, hey, there's some podcast hosts I really like that, man, they use a lot of language. Should I be listening to them? If there's particular shows that I think have a lot of value and I want to hear their take on it, that might be one thing, but should I keep them on my regular rotation? Things like that. But actually discerning and being active and not just taking it all in.
Right.
Because I do find I could stub my toe without listening to them, and I could stub my toe after I listen to them, and I could have two different exclamations come out of my mouth or come into my head or heart.
Yeah. I think that's really important. And I think the important thing is to wrestle with it. I don't know that there's a clear-cut answer. I don't think there's a clear-cut in scripture of no, like if your coworker is telling a joke and you're laughing with them, but then they use a swear word, like you immediately go stone-faced.
Yeah, you can't be
in
like,
the moment.
All right, yeah, stoic now, go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Turn on silent
you're
mode.
really funny. I don't approve. You know what I mean? Like I just don't think that's human. I don't think that's real. I don't think God calls us to be some sort of like moral robot.
Yeah, and we're also not, again, you're not everybody else's police. You're not someone else's Holy Spirit or their police.
But I think you should wrestle with it. I don't think you should just consume. I think you should have the question like, hey, if I enjoy whatever, the Chappelle Show or whatever else, whatever comedy or media or whatever that
what effect
has
is
that,
it having you on?
Yeah, just think about
having on you. What in the world? What effect is it having you on? That's good for the blue for real.
Great. But yeah, like just what's the effect, and also like what's the morality of you enjoying it? Like I think you should still struggle with, is it right for me to enjoy this? And maybe if you were more Christ-like, would you enjoy it less? We should think about those things. We should strive to be more holy and strive to be more like Christ as believers than strive to be entertained.
That is true. But I do still really hope I can score tickets to Hamilton when they come to Kansas City.
They're swearing in Hamilton?
Have you not listened to it?
Nope.
Very good. I recommend it.
Well, speaking about recommendations, we've got a new show segment that I'm super stoked for. So, Philip.
So we've been working on, because again, we want to keep improving the show. We want you guys to like listening to it. We want it to be a lot of fun to do. Keep it fresh, keep it fun. So one of the things that we're going to add, this segment that Trevor's talking about, is at the end of our non-media review shows, because those tend to go long.
That's true.
And we don't want to go too long.
True.
Is at shows like this or the topic toss-ups, things like that. Towards the end, do what we're going to be calling substance shoutouts. So this isn't, we were thinking about calling it substantive shoutouts, but we're going to do the show every week. We don't want to necessarily make ourselves every week be like, what's the really deep part of the thing that I've been liking? This is basically, what have we found enjoyable, edifying, of value? What have we been liking and enjoying in culture lately?
Yeah, absolutely. You want to start off?
Substance shout out. Sure. I'll start off. So my substance shout out this week is going to be the J Monty videos that he's been doing on Twitter. We'll maybe link to his Twitter or link to his recent one. He's been promoting his new, what I imagine is going to be his new problem. Nope.
New album?
Project was the word I was going for, and I said problem. So let's.
You took project and album and put them together and got problem.
Well, I guess now we're leaving this audio in. I was going to take a second pass at that.
That's amazing.
But he's been promoting his new project, Testify.
Yeah.
And man, I've enjoyed all those videos. The last one, I think it came out today or yesterday. And the refrain in that one was, I don't follow Yahweh, I follow Yahweh.
Love
and
it.
Man, it's just real good. Started off with a little bit of baseball, and I've been enjoying baseball a lot more. And it was great. I can't wait for J Monty's new project. I have no idea how I missed his last album. It came out a couple of years ago, but ever since I saw his videos, I went back on his last album and been listening a lot. My son enjoys that a lot too, and I don't have to worry about a clean version. So J Monty, Testify promotion videos, really
all
great.
The versions are clean. Love it. So yeah. And
what about you?
Man, I listen to a lot of podcasts, as you know, and one podcast that really has blown me away as just time and again a great one to listen to and super exciting is the Love Thy Neighborhood podcast. I started listening to this probably last month or something like that.
And you have cranked it.
As of now, I have consumed all of their publicly available audio, at least in
the
podcast
podcast. They have 2 different
realm.
shows too, right?
They have 2 different shows, and they've got some videos on their website and stuff like that. But honestly, I went in with a lot of skepticism. I wanted to hear, because I knew that they talked about racial reconciliation and some of these social issues. And
yeah, their whole platform is social justice ministries.
Yeah, social justice in Christian community kind of thing. But so I did feel like, man, when I was first listening to them, I was like, I'll give these guys a listen. They're probably like way different from my faith tradition, or, you know, they may not be, I might not be in agreement with them on all points on like the gospel and how it should be carried out and all that kind of stuff. But let's hear what they have to say. And honestly, like nuanced, solid, conservative.
It's really good.
But just deep level responses with actual human beings. And man, you guys just have to check out Love Thy Neighborhood. It's so good.
And I recently
heartily recommend all their episodes, and we link to some of their stuff. Because
absolutely.
The constant thing that keeps frustrating me is like, we talk about doing a show and then I'll see that they did it and I'm like, they already did it better than us. So, not that we don't have a voice in there, but it's highly produced. It's like listening to This American Life. It's so good.
Also, cool note on that. I recently found out that I have a few friends in common with Jesse Eubanks on Facebook, recently connected and hoping to have him on a show at some point in the future.
Dude, that would be awesome. Love it.
Maybe have him and his assistant.
Rachel Zabo?
Yeah, I don't want to say assistant. That's offensive.
Producer.
Yes. Rachel Zabo, who is the second time I've ever heard that name in my life.
Zabo?
Yeah, not a terribly common name. She didn't. I checked
No
out on
relation.
Facebook. She's got no.
We have some friends.
Common people with the Zabos that we know. So.
Nice. Well, cool. Those are our substance shout-outs for today, and we'll keep bringing that segment to you.
I am excited about the future of that segment as well. Yeah. And again, continue to keep the interaction coming. We really love it. We got a really good email question from a listener that we will probably take on either an episode that's a little bit shorter or maybe potentially on a future topic toss-up.
Yeah, we're really excited
really good
to
question.
Talk about Christians in public education, stuff like that. So thanks for sending that in.
So on this next portion here, want to just thank you guys. We've had a lot of people give us a 5-star rating, and some of you guys are even kind enough to give us reviews. Honestly, hitting that 5-star button and writing a little review is really the best way that you guys, if you appreciate what we do here, if you like our conversation, if you want to help us make it easy for it to continue, hit that 5-star button, write a real quick review. That's huge.
Yep. Tell a friend about it.
Tell a friend. So, going to be reading 3 this week. Keep them coming so that we have 3 to read each week. That'd be awesome. Real great. So, from A Pride 6226 says, great stuff. 2 gentlemen who love the Lord, know his word, engaging with great topics. I feel like we might have read that on one of the other episodes. Whatever. I need to start keeping a list of the people we do shout out
to. In case we did.
If we've read that twice, thank you twice. This other one says, well worth the listen from Substance Fan 123.
Man,
which is super dope. I don't know if that's their actual name on iTunes. Probably not, but it's kind of cool that somebody would type that in. So they said, well worth the listen. These guys aren't afraid to address the tough and important issues. Appreciate their transparent and honest discussion, grounded in truth.
Nice. I love that.
So in this last one, I got a real kick out of because I wasn't quite sure how to read it.
There was some mystery surrounding this for a little bit. Did some detective work.
So from ballboy19 hashtag says, great for my class, ! I am using some of the podcasts in my Christian worldview class at a Christian high school. The students are enjoying it, and I am too. Then at the end, it says, and the Phil guy is an okay host, ... The
part I agreed with most was that last part, I think.
So I did a little detective work. We're like, okay, I wasn't
humbled,
entirely sure how to read that last line, but that's so wild.
Yeah. Man, that's awesome. Like that's really, really encouraging to hear.
we've been working on this for a while, but we've only been out for a little over a month at the time of this recording.
Yeah.
And just some of the feedback we've gotten already is just very humbling and encouraging.
Really touching. Yeah, absolutely.
So did a little bit of research on that. We know some people who are teachers who have Bible classes and things like that. Mm-hmm. I reached out. I texted a few guys that I thought might do this. They're like, nope, it's not me. Nope, wasn't me. Oh, that's funny. It wasn't me. And I was like, all right, who did this? Went to the interwebs on Facebook and Twitter, and I got a response. So actually, this is a buddy of mine from college. Revealed. This is a buddy of mine from college who teaches now at the Collegiate School in Memphis. And that would be the super cool Mr. Fowler.
So shout out to Mr. Fowler's class.
Yeah, his worldview class. Glad you guys are enjoying it. If there's anything in particular that you'd love to hear us talk about, we'd love to consider some of your guys' suggestions in the future. And
we know all you guys are on Twitter, so follow us on our socials and that kind of stuff. And we would love to engage with some of the questions and ideas that you guys have there. And it sounds like that school's doing a lot of great work. So shout out to you guys. Keep it up. It's awesome.
And where can they find us, Trev?
Well, yeah, if you are jumping on Twitter looking to interact with some questions or comments or ideas, you can find us at The Substance Pod. You can find us The Substance Pod on Facebook. You can email us, thesubstancepod@gmail.com, which is covered by the Substance Guarantee. I will read it.
And I might.
Pretty much it. You can even leave us a voice message if you are the phone up a friend type at our phone number 913-703-3888.
And can they also, if they're on the Anchor app?
Yeah, you can download the Anchor app. This is put out through Anchor, which is a really awesome service that lets you podcast host for free. And you can find us on our website, anchor.fm/thesubstancepod. With them, you can download the app and send us a voice message. Here's another cool thing that you can do on our website at anchor.fm/thesubstancepod.
So in lieu of, we looked at a couple different options of support, and whether it's Patreon's a popular one, we checked that out, but it didn't seem like the best way if you wanted to give to us directly.
Yeah, and we're going to do, there might be more things that we roll out in the future, but
we're definitely brainstorming some stretch goals and things like that for you guys.
So if you're ever wondering, like, hey, like, do they make any money doing this thing?
We'd love to.
We would love to. And there's kind of currently 3 ways that we've got set up to generate income. One is by some of the media links that you might see on our show notes. If you, for example, loved our Tree of Life episode and decided you wanted to watch Tree of Life,
which, shout out to John on Twitter, who said he did watch the Tree of Life, and our discussion was helpful, and he enjoyed that. Us and Brett was so good on that, man.
It's really excited. It was a really cool episode. But if you scroll down into the show notes and clicked on that iTunes link for Tree of Life and purchased the movie through there, we get some commission for sending people to those links from iTunes or hopefully in the future from Amazon and stuff like that. So that's one way. But the other 2 ways is you can just give directly to the show. And you can do that as a one-time thing through the Cash App, which has cool promotion through it.
And by one time, he means you can give to us once at a time. Like, you don't just have to give to us once, but it's not a recurring.
Yeah.
It's not like $1 a month, $3 a month, $5 a month. If you send us $5 on Cash App, you're just sending us $5 one time, which thanks to everybody who's using our link and sending us $10 for free, or anybody that's been sending us. We've had a few listeners do that, and every little bit counts. We're looking at upgrading some equipment and doing some other cool marketing ideas, and every little bit helps.
Yeah, you could technically support the show without spending any money if you downloaded the Cash App for the first time through our link and then just used it to send $5 anywhere. You'd get $5, we'd get $5. So definitely check out that link that's there. And check out the Anchor site if you were someone who was enjoying the show and wanted to support it on a regular basis. There's ways that you can do that through our Anchor website, anchor.fm/thesubstancepod.
So that's it. Oh, jeez. My wife and I were just talking about Monsters Inc. today.
Nice. That's funny.
Serendipitous.
So thanks for stopping by on this episode, and we'll see you next week.
See you, everybody.
In summation, I think you just got to not do it, man. That's all.
I understand what you're saying, and your comments are valuable, but I'm going to ignore your advice.
The cuss you are.
The cuss am I? Are you cussing with me?
No, you cussing with me?
Don't cuss and point
You're
at me.
going to cuss with somebody. You're not going to cuss with me, you little cuss.
With me. You